And I think it's interesting, as people say, and it is important to specialize, but people ask you what you specialize in. And, there's something to be said, at least in my case, is that I've got a flavor, I've got a taste for every aspect of real estate.
Hello and welcome to episode 15 of the Smart Agents Podcast. My name is Michael Walter and I'll be your host. With each episode, our goal is to inspire you through the insight and inspirational stories from fellow real estate insiders. Now, before we get started with today's featured interview, make sure to follow and subscribe to the show on whatever platform you listen to podcasts. You can find it on everything from Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, you name it, we are there. Also, as you can see if you're watching this on YouTube, make sure you subscribe to the Smart Agents YouTube channel. Click the bell to get notifications for each time a new episode is uploaded. And lastly, if you or someone else on your team has an awesome story to share, send us a message at feedback@smartagents.com. We're always on the lookout for new agents to feature. Now, in today's featured interview, we talk with Declan O'Toole out of Boston, Massachusetts. Declan's built an extremely well-rounded business that includes everything from property management to luxury real estate. Our conversation touched on a wide variety of topics, but the main theme really centered around his ability to adapt to market changes and how that's led to the success that he's achieved. Declan also shares his tips for staying focused and delegating tasks. I hope you enjoy our conversation. Just kind of starting out, could you tell me just a little bit of your background, how you got into real estate and where you're at?
Sure. So I'll try and keep a long story short. I probably won't. So at some point you'll have to interrupt me. I actually, obviously you can tell by my accent, I'm not from around here. I'm from Ireland. I came over here in 1994. About a year before Ireland actually took off, they called it the Celtic Tiger. So I don't know if it was a coincidence or not, but I left and the country got better. So, but I actually was in the process of, I was looking at possibly going to Australia. I got my visa. I'd even met with the band U2 and made arrangements to meet them in Australia backstage. And a friend of mine was getting a job with the property company. There's a company here where he had 350 units. And he said, look, maybe there might be a property management position here. So I've got a management background as well as a real estate sales background. Met up with him, drove around this truck. He was barking orders at the guys that were trying to get work done. And, he did a lot of sort of small development as well. And it was a Thursday. And of course I was, I'm migrating, I'm going off to Australia. I figured I'd do this sort of get together. I was explaining to him that I'd never worked on a property in my life. I'd only picked up a hammer to hang pictures and they weren't very well hung and didn't, I didn't know how to use a screw gun. So anyway, he turns to me and he goes, can you start Monday? So that's the reason I'm in this country, never mind property management and real estate sales. So I worked for him for a couple of years. He had multi-family properties, they were anywhere from 12 to 20 units. And there's actually a real estate broker came through, he was selling the property. And we decided to do lunch. It was right around lunchtime. And I sat down with him after he was showing one of his clients. And he asked me, he said, look, why, how is it, I show a lot of properties. He says, why are your tenants always happy? I said, that's because I come 20 minutes before you show up. Your client's not supposed to talk to them. And, I talk to them. They tell me about the mouse. They tell me about the dog with the tenant next door, the leak in the faucet. I tell them I'll take care of it. And 20 minutes later, you show up, they're happy because I just told them what I could do for them. So, and it was actually, I used to give them a bottle of, $2 Chuck 2, which is, the Charles Schwab wine, just for, for the inconvenience of doing the showing. So, he said, well, why don't you do real estate sales? I'd already looked into doing it. So I realize now I'm giving you the long version of this story.
No, go for it.
So he was doing commercial. It was a multifamily. It was 9+ unit deals. And that's where I kind of learned. I still have the book that I used to do it. Basically what you do is we used to knock on doors. We take photographs. We count the mailboxes. We get a map. Back in the day, it was a paper map, and we ended up essentially reaching out to owners, and we'd call them and see if they'd entertain an offer on the property from a buyer. And a long story short, I started doing multifamily sales. One of the buyers purchased the property and he converted the condos. This was back in the mid 2000s. So 2003, 4, 5. And he said, look, would you be interested? In fact, it was the same person who introduced me to the property management company. He'd gone out on his own. They said, how about we split it? I'm a developer, but you've got I had my broker's license at the time. Why don't we, do this together and, split the fee. And that was that's great. You're supplying me property. So now I'm a residential agent. That's how I got into residential real estate. And I think I'm one of the few people that actually kind of backdoored it in that way from commercial to residential. It usually goes the other way. Right. So we're selling properties for about a year. I had, to do my errors and omissions insurance, and I looked at it, and it was 57% of the deals. I had to go through all my transactions as part of the process. I'd done that were all mine, and they weren't, his property. So I said, hold on, this doesn't make sense. I'm paying 50% on everything I do, and it was great. It was a great setup and got me up and going. So I went out on my own. So that was back in 2005, and they talk about the 2008 crash. It really started slowing down late 2005, early 2006.
Right.
So I'd done fairly well from that, working with in that situation with the partnership. I set up my own company, and in Boston, State Street, sort of the main street, or in the financial district, I got myself, an office. I sublet an office at 1 State Street. Great address. I broke my leg soon after I got there, so I had to get a parking spot nearby. And at the time, it was like $300. This is 2005, $300 a month for a parking space.
Right.
And it was also, the internet hadn't quite taken off. So I started buying, I figured it was all about branding. Home Run Realty was the brand. I still have the Home Run Realty brand. And I started selling ads and basically open houses. I ended up actually within 3 months, I had 52 listings. I remember looking at that, and I remember got on the multiple listing service at the time. I'm like, I'm the only person that has 52 listings. They said, this is fantastic. So when you've got 52 listings, now keep in mind, some of them might be 3 families, that's 3 listings. So it's not like it was 52 different properties. So I was, I had it made, right? I was all set, ready to roll. So again, as I said, that was a slowdown. I think I incorporated the week that the market peaked in Boston. And so I ended up, I was spending something like $16,000 a month between ads, open house ads in the Boston Globe. It's branding, got to get the name out there. People will see your name. And so long story short was I started, that started, dwindling down the account pretty fast. And the market did turn, and I changed my strategy, I suppose. I backed out of, eventually got out of the office on State Street, and I started looking at the foreclosure properties, because within a couple of years, they started going in that direction where foreclosures were, unfortunately, that was what the market was. So what I did was I'd go to a foreclosure and, just to kind of see what was going on. I started getting inquiries from investors that were looking at foreclosure properties and looking at going to auctions. And what I did was I'm an early starter. So, between 4 and 5 in the morning, I'd look at every auction for the day. Now, 3 auctions might go out of 10 in that day. I went down, I did an analysis. I basically do a spreadsheet analysis. It's something I do for my agents as well if they want to learn how to work with investors. I did an analysis where I break down that property, say, okay, how much is that property worth now? Now, you haven't gotten inside it. You haven't seen the property. On occasion, I'd stop down and knock on the door and see if there was somebody still, in the property, or talk to their neighbors. But basically, I'd look at the 10 properties or 12 properties or 9 properties, whatever it was for the day. I do an analysis, and basically, for the 3 that would go, I get a phone call. It's like, hey, how much is this worth? And I have an idea of what I think it was worth now as is, and after repair value, right? So assuming it's not falling down, you get an idea of what you'd have to. I didn't even get into what you'd spend to get it to where it needs to be, just what the sales value would be. And I get a call. So what started happening was, in fact, it was kind of funny. There were a couple of auctions where I'd get a phone call, and it'd be like, okay, here's, 495 Main Street. What's it worth? I've done my work. I think here's your number. Don't go over this price. Another phone or on the other line, pop in. What's 495 Main Street worth? Like, oh, so you're at that auction. I ended up having multiple buyers who called me about the same auction looking for advice. But long story short is it was a little bit fortuitous. I ended up being I ended up having some of these for sale, of course, on the other side. And I became, just the way it kind of worked out, I was one of the few people that had these investment properties, multifamily properties in the Boston area, that had them for sale. So the buyers were all calling me. I got to know all the sellers. So I kind of became sort of the linchpin in there. And I actually had set up, that's how I basically got into, I suppose, multifamily investment purchase and sales.
Right.
And I had that business going for quite a while. There was an investor that came and looked at a property that I had that had 8 units, and the person that was selling it had, tried to do something in the basement, but it wouldn't have been up to code, and it wasn't going to happen.
Right.
And he was looking at buying the property based on 12 units. And I was being honest with him. I said, look, you mentioned it to me. I have to tell you, you're not going to be able to get that, you're not going to get that to code. It's not going to work. Same person kind of befriended me, got to know him, and he worked for a developer. They would buy these properties, they'd do them up. They actually also bought land and developed. They developed residential housing, with a lot of it was luxury type housing in the Boston area. So what happened was, he came along, he knew about my management background, and asked me if I'd be interested in managing some of the units. They felt like they were being mismanaged, and so there was 75 units in South Boston, one of the neighborhoods in Boston. And he, asked me if I'd be interested in taking over. I said, well, that's fine. He says, but you got leasing going on there. I said, I'll tell you what, I'll manage those units if you let me take over the leasing. So suddenly now I was going from, people ask you what you specialize in. So, I was the investor of foreclosure properties. Now I'm, it was luxury real estate. And that was my thing. I said, look, if you let me lease those properties, and I'm managing those properties for you, you know where to find me. You can fire me anytime you want, if it's not working out. So I ended up managing those properties, and basically I got the leases on them as well. And that's kind of where the structure started happening. So I ended up, Home Run Realty is, as I said, the brand up to that point in time, and that's but it's not a luxury brand, and I'm not really big into the naming thing, but essentially I came up with Select Real Estate, and that's the brand that I'm better known as right now.
Right. So
Select Real Estate took care of the downtown properties, the luxury type properties for leasing, and obviously sales as well. And I hired a very good individual, Tom, who still works with me, to do the leasing. So I outsourced it. So I'm a broker. So Tom started doing the leasing. He was the person that the tenants started calling when something came up in terms of maintenance issues, etc. So he became the manager. So he was leasing and managing, and that kind of get me into a position where I could leverage as a broker. I had Tom was doing that, and I could keep doing what I was doing. And over the years, we took over a number of different, same owner developer, developed those properties. And, we took them over the South End, North End, just a number of different places that we took over his units. And what happened was I branched out. I left Tom still working with that developer. And in fact, I'm meeting with the same developer later today about investment properties. And I essentially moved on and set up my own company, which was GB Property Management. So I actually had my assistant, Shane, who's actually now my business partner. I hired him 5 years ago, and I joked to him. I said he's taking over my company because he basically runs the management side of my business, which is GB Property Management, which is my our management company, and we've really got that set up for basically about a year and a half. So essentially, that's where we've gotten to. If you want an elevator speech of what we do, we help you. We help you identify a property. We can vacate it if needs be. We can do renovations, we can do full build outs, we can lease it, we can manage it, and we can sell it. So we're basically a one-stop shop boutique property management sales company.
Wow. So from possibly moving to Australia, you've kind of adapted just as things have clicked for you. I mean, it just really like things have really you've capitalized on every opportunity that's come along.
I have, and it's one of those things. They say, "What's luck? Luck is where opportunity meets preparation meets opportunity." I just happened to, I didn't. It wasn't a script I wrote for myself. Trust me. It's just the way things played out.
Right.
And I think it's interesting, as people say, and it is important to specialize. But people ask you what you specialize in. There's something to be said. At least in my case, is that I've got a flavor, got a taste for every aspect of real estate. I've done, even that's mostly residential. I've done self-storage buildings, et cetera. But basically, yes, that's kind of I've adapted to the economy essentially because what I was selling and buying before that wasn't going to work. I mean, as I said, 52 listings. If you keep turning those over, you've got a lifetime worth of business from your sphere, but that's yeah, you're right. I kind of adapted to the surroundings.
Right.
I'm a chameleon.
In just a second, I want to talk to you about your experience in foreclosures, just because, you know, as COVID and everything's going on with our foreclosure moratoriums and things like that, what do you see in the future? But before we get into that, I do want to talk to you about the commercial and the multi-unit. You know,
Sure.
I think a lot of people sometimes, especially residential agents, might be afraid of that kind of scale of things. What kind of tips do you have for people that are looking to maybe branch into that realm of real estate?
Yeah, so my first tip is, if you're an agent in the Boston area and you want to get into that, call me. And actually, funny enough, even if you're not looking to work with me, I'm happy to help people out. It's, you know, I enjoy it, and from that perspective, first off, commercial is no harder than residential. That's the first thing. So from a mentality perspective, there really isn't. I mean, it just so happens I came in from commercial to residential, so it's easy for me to say, but there's not much to it. I would say learn the basics, which is look up what a cap rate is, know what a rent multiplier is, know some of the basic calculations of, you know, for a property. And then you've got the tools in front of you, you've got the multiple listing service, go on and see what a property sold for. If you know if you know what the rents are for a property, for example, let's say it's a 3-family, let's go get simple. And the 3-family has certain rent roll. Won't take too long before you can work out, you take 25% off, or pick a number, take off for your expenses when you take in water and sewer, et cetera. So a cap rate is for those that don't know, is your net operating income. It's your gross income from your rents. Maybe you get it from laundry machines. Basically your gross income minus your expenses, which is, you know, water and sewer, insurance, management, all those things that you pay taxes during the year. And you get down to, you know, we'll call it 75% of it. So there's your net operating income, and you know your cap rate is that over the purchase price. Essentially, it's a percentage of it. So what your return is, how much you're getting as a percentage. So again, we're not getting into the specifics of it. If you know those basics, you know, essentially. And the other thing I would say is, I think I even did it when I was in real estate. When I first got into residential real estate, I found somebody that I could talk to. So there's an agency, Village Realty in Dorchester. You know, I called them about just silly things. You know, the lead paint forms. You know, just making sure. Same thing with the commercial. If you know somebody that's in the business, most people that certainly if they've been there for a while, they're going to be happy to help you out with it, teach you how it's done. So I'd say the first thing, if you're asking for advice, the advice is talk to somebody that knows that business. And don't be afraid to ask the quote unquote stupid questions, because there are no stupid questions if you don't know the answers.
Right. Well, I think that's what's so great about this industry as a whole, is that there are so many different backgrounds and so many different ways of doing things that you can find. And there are a lot of people like yourself that are very open to teaching, and even just doing interviews like this. I mean, you just go on, you search anything on YouTube and you're going to find somebody giving their, advice.
Yeah, there's a, it's funny. I think it's in any industry. And it's one thing that I do love about the States, for what it's worth. There's this, there's fail forward, but there's also in the States, people tend to, people give a hand up, right? Most your competitors usually are friends. If I'm in the same business as you, we're not going to be stepping on each other's toes. I mean, on occasion, maybe, but it's better for people to cooperate. And I do see that a lot. So yeah, absolutely. I think if you know somebody that's in the commercial business, and it's happened with me a few times. I've had agents that have come in and they want to break into something, and maybe they're dealing with me on something else. Mm-hmm. They want to learn more, and I'll get a phone call or an email, and you get as much out of it teaching them and showing them as they do out of picking your brain, so to speak.
Right. Well, and you never know where maybe 5 years down the road, that one conversation that you had with somebody, what kind of business deal that might lead to down the road.
Absolutely. Or even if you come across them and they're selling something, or vice versa, if you are, you tend to do business with people you like doing business with, so, you take offers and, you're supposed to look at them equally, but at the same time, you want to do business with a person that you can get to the end line with, that you can close with. And they're usually people that you know, like, and trust. And that does happen. It is swings and roundabouts. Stuff it does come back to you.
Right. One of the things that I heard you mention several times was talking about running an analysis on things. So I know, especially for the commercial, you just have to be very organized with your stuff. And how important is that to really understand all of the nuance behind, like you said, the taxes and the costs, and just keeping so really organized?
Yeah, so I mean, and I would not claim to be the most organized person in the world. Just I'm going to throw that out there right now, but I think I overcompensate. So, good spreadsheet. I mean, with the commercial, you'd be surprised. A good spreadsheet can get you very. The property management is different. We can certainly talk about that too. But on the when you're working on those cap rates, et cetera, I actually have templates. So what I'll do is I use literally just Dropbox, right? I would organize everything into Dropbox if it's analysis type work. And then what I'll do is my spreadsheet, I'll switch the name, I'll put in the different. So it's actually, you'll be surprised if you have if you've got a good template, and I share my template with my clients as well, show them what I have, say, look, you go do an analysis yourself. Once you have that, you have everything organized. Again, in this case, it's Dropbox. I'm trying to move to Google Drive, but that's another conversation. But yeah, no, it's really a case of just keeping it all in files, keeping it in the right place, and then having a template that has the right. So the information changes as you go. I'm an Excel guy, and the Excel spreadsheets certainly go a long way. If you're looking at it from the perspective of doing a transaction, that's a different situation. You definitely need to be organized. Need to organize your files. Something I use is Dotloop. It's an online, basically it breaks everything down. And for my agents, when agents are working with me, they have to upload certain forms to get a deal done. Because you can't, you certainly couldn't pay a commission, for instance, and find that you don't have the tax ID number because you never got a W-9 from somebody. At the end of the year, then you got the bookkeepers, et cetera, coming looking for it. Speaking of which, so on a bigger picture organizing, I actually outsource a lot of what I have. So I mentioned the bookkeeper. I have a bookkeeper that takes care of all my bookkeeping. She's from the Philippines. She's the equivalent of a CPA in the Philippines and does everything. Like behind the scenes, has limited access to my accounts. So a lot of that stuff's done for me. So I think if I spent my time trying to do my debits and credits, it's going to take away time from something else. And that's where you can very easily get disorganized. My marketing, I know I'm getting away from the commercial real estate a little bit. No. Yeah, but marketing, for instance, I have again, and I've had him for years, is that Ivan does a lot of my marketing. I've got a team again in the Philippines. Have you ever read the 4-Hour Workweek? I learned a lot from that book, just in terms of how to leverage yourself. And the leverage, it's a great way of organizing yourself. So I have a bookkeeper takes care of my books. I have a marketing team that does, and it gets me out of going onto Facebook myself, so I don't go down the rabbit hole. So, there's a lot of, I just posts I don't see that are my own posts. For instance, I have them doing, the way I have it set up is Ivan will do a testimonial. He'll probably take that from Zillow, some of my own testimonials. He'll do my video podcast that I do myself. And then there might be a home of the week or something else that we're working on. And that just kind of keeps us in front of people. But again, it means that I'm not disorganized by doing it myself. I'm not disorganized by trying to do my books. And then I have an assistant, and I work with Jagger's been really good for me, but I've got basically an intern, and I try to go work with interns. So basically, Monday through Thursday usually, that will look through my emails, organize, prioritize, and get back to people, set up appointments, schedules. And again, it's not that expensive, if you can do it smart. And that's opened up a lot of room for me to be able to work on this stuff, and in theory, the bigger dollar stuff, work on your actual business.
Right. Well, I think especially when it comes to like that marketing thing, like you talked about, like going down the rabbit holes of things, you can get so wrapped up in the way one little post looks. Yeah. That, by the time you look around, you're 6 hours into it, you're like, what have I done with my day?
Right. And then you got your list. I have a list here in front of me. You got a list of people you got to get back to, or things you need to get done. Yeah, you're right. It's so easy. And as I said, that's my personality too. There's a little. I like to say I'm a great lateral thinker. It's another word for ADD, but I call it lateral thinking. That I can go in lots of directions. That's why I have somebody else focus on that stuff, because I know if I go on Facebook, you go on Twitter. In fact, to the point where I've had one person come to me, it was an attorney that I know very well in real estate, said, wow, it's amazing how your tweets get to the top of his feed all the time. How do you do that? I said, well, I haven't been on in a while. So much so that a friend of mine just yesterday said, do you know, Declan, that you've got a picture of yourself where you look like Tom Cruise? I've got a full mop of hair. I'm like, maybe it's time to change it, because it looks like it's an imposter that's doing my Twitters. I suppose there is, right? It's my guy in the Philippines.
Right. So where did you, I know there's a lot of different kind of outsourcing places, where to find these people to help you do these, and to help, kind of fill these positions. What did you use to fill these positions?
It's been a while back. There is a company, and if I can find it, I know I can. Maybe I'll send it on to you, Michael, if you want to have that information for down the road, or to share. There was a company. I paid them $500, and it's kicking me that I don't have it at the top of my head, but I paid them $500. What they did was they interviewed 3 candidates. This was actually initially for a virtual assistant, and that was kind of where I went in that direction. They interviewed 3 different candidates. They interviewed maybe 10 candidates. They gave you 3 to interview yourself. And then you'd interview them, as it turns out, the first person I interviewed and used, I wasn't happy with her. Now, they did personality tests, they do the whole rigmarole, they do multiple interviews. I wasn't happy. You go back to them. I got somebody else, and I worked with her for about 4 years. So again, out of the Philippines. There are a couple of sites, and again, I'm skipping on them right now, but that's how I initially got into it. And then I got an introduction to Ivan, who was my assistant at the time in the Philippines, and he's kind of helped me with the marketing.
Right. Yeah. There's the sites like Upwork and things like that. We work with a lot of folks in the Philippines. I actually make a big portion of our team, and it's wonderful having that connection with everybody around the world, and and it really does help with. I have on our editorial team, Guillermo. He's one of our web builders, and it's awesome. You just send him, here's the notes, and he knocks it out, and he's so good at what he does. I don't know how to do any of that stuff.
The other thing is, I think there was once I was doing a big presentation for somebody, and basically I got to the point where I had it ready to go at 5, but that was ready to start putting it together, make it look good. I went to sleep, got up the next morning, it was ready for me because they were working opposite hours. And some work opposite hours, they'll also work your hours if they have to work with you. I think the key though there with that is it's hiring them correctly. I certainly do believe that $500 is money well spent. But the other part of that is, and you'll know this if you are working with virtual assistants, they're not in the same place. I know we're in a Zoom world now, but is making sure that you give very specific details of what you want, and there will be mistakes. You got to iron out the kinks when you start. But once you get it done, and you got a good, solid, smart individual, they'll be a great asset to have. Right.
So, kind of moving over to the foreclosures and your experience with that. As we kind of move into 2021,
right?
There's forecasting to be. There's a massive amount of properties and homes that are kind of right on that, line, right, to being foreclosures. First of all, what do you see happening next year? And then, so I'll start with that. Yeah. What do you see happening next year? Well,
I think, so we're at the end of 2020, right? So we're going into 2021. I think what you're going to see is, and I see it again, so I'm going to speak for my own market in Boston. It is, so it used to be, if you owned rental property, even student housing, a lot of students in Boston, you were made. There's nothing. The economy can't really impact you. You're always going to get your rents. A lot of those apartments are vacant right now. A lot. There's a lot of vacancy. So you've got a situation right now where there's also rent moratoriums. There's a situation where people, some aren't paying rent. You're having an income issue as property owners. So yes, they're going to get in trouble. The banks, it's not like there's going to be a bank bailout to help them take care of the guys that are supposed to, pay them their mortgage. So I think I don't think it's necessarily going to be 2021. I think you're looking more at 2022, because again, the foreclosure, that hasn't started yet, and you're going to go into next year. I think what's going to happen before even the foreclosures happen, you're going to have properties that are being sold, and sellers are always the last people to know what the property is worth, right? So it'll take a while. But I think next year, 2022, it won't necessarily be foreclosures. I think it's going to be people that are under distress, that are trying to sell the properties, and they're willing to take a deal. 2022, I think, is when the foreclosures are going to start happening. And it'll be interesting to see what happens, what kind of bailouts there are in the meantime. But I do think it's going to be, I hate to say it, there's going to be blood on the streets.
Yeah. And for, the residential agents and things like that, what would you say to them to start preparing for that so that they aren't caught up in it, that they can work through that and get ready for the foreclosures?
So in terms of, so that they don't lose out that the property that they normally sell that's available to them. So I think that then is a case of maybe you do something similar to what I did, which is maybe have a look. There are foreclosure sites. You can, again, maybe Google it. I don't have them all in front of me, and it wouldn't make sense. I could give you, but you've got a national audience. So it's, I just bore you with the names of local but auction houses. I get to know who they are. I would set up a spreadsheet with all their contact information. And this is at least the way I did it. And then what you do is you get a properties, set up a template. Again, I'm happy to help people out with templates if they need that. And you basically work out what the cap rates are. So I suppose what I'm saying is knowledge is key, right? Mm-hmm. So if you're talking about being the person that sells foreclosure properties, that's asset management. That's actually property management on steroids. That's hard to break into, because if you're a real estate agent, you're probably not necessarily an asset manager. I happen to be, but it's not that type of asset that I'm managing. Because what happens is, and that's how they get into foreclosures. I know certainly that starts with doing BPOs, broker price opinions for the banks. Again, it hasn't really happened yet, but start doing broker price opinions, then they're more likely to give you a foreclosure. But that's a whole different world. So I would say if you're an agent, you're a transactional agent, you're not in management, I would say get to know the auctions, get to know where they are, do what I do. It doesn't have to be at 4 a.m, but get up and sort of spend an hour or so researching what's coming up that day and working out what you think a property's worth. If you know your neighborhood, you probably know what the property's worth, because you're going to see them selling as well on the MLS, or see what the numbers are. And you know what I would do? Show up at the auctions, get to know a couple of the buyers, have a conversation, and you'll be surprised. If they like you, they may give you that business.
Right. And I think that's a really good idea to start doing right now, and get ingrained with these people that you might be working with in a year, 2 years down the road. Because
you can look. The other thing too is, and people close on a property, is there's public record says who they are. I mean, you have to do a little bit more searching if it's an LLC, and you've got to go back to the state records. But maybe make a phone call and say, hey, look, I'm an agent. I'm in this area. I'd like to. Worst thing that's going to happen is going to say, no, I won't meet you for a coffee. So, that's. I think that's it. Just be present, and it doesn't take long. As I said, I as one person got to know essentially all the buyers and sellers in that last turn, and it was really just by being there. And you don't have to sell a couple of properties, and everybody's going to come to you and ask you questions.
Right. Well, I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to me. I feel like, you have a huge wealth of knowledge. We could go on forever.
Well, thanks for having me, Michael. This has been fun.
So I really want to thank Declan for joining me. And as you can see, his ability to adapt to the changing market has really been a major reason for his success. And we'll certainly be talking with Declan more in the future. So once again, if you think you or someone else on your team has an awesome story or tip to share with our community, send us a message at feedback@smartagents.com. Well, that wraps things up for this episode, but remember, follow the show wherever you listen to podcasts, and make sure you subscribe to the Smart Agents YouTube channel. Again, I'm Michael Walter, and I'll see you on the next episode.